Wild hogs make the cover of Texas Monthly. You know this is a menace to be reckoned with. State wildlife officials say they are more destructive and feral hogs in Texas than any other state right now. They're destroying lawns in McKinney. We've heard about this, so we sent Robbie Owens out there. She's been talking to folks in that area who are frustrated, and they say they just cannot fight this problem by themselves.
The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department has put the direct cost to crops alone at around $119 million a year. That number only covers what gets eaten or trampled in the field. Once you add torn fencing, ruined irrigation lines, contaminated ponds, and the diseases hogs carry into cattle herds, agricultural economists at Texas A&M now put the full statewide toll above $500 million annually. This is not pest control anymore. It is closer to an ongoing siege, waged by an animal that outbreeds, outadapts, and outlasts almost anything humans throw at it. To understand why Texas ended up here, you have to go back roughly 500 years. There were no wild pigs native to this continent. The animals we now call feral hogs arrived with Spanish expeditions in the 1500s, carried along as a walking food supply that could forage for itself between stops. Settlers who came after kept the same habit, turning domestic pigs loose to fend for themselves in the woods and rounding them up whenever meat was needed. Some of those pigs wandered off for good. Others were simply left behind. Later, hunters imported true European wild boar for sport, and those animals began breeding with the descendants of the escaped farm pigs. What came out of that mixing was tougher and smarter than either parent, an animal with the size and aggression of a boar and the adaptability of a barnyard pig that had learned to survive without anyone feeding it. Texas gave that hybrid everything it needed: mild winters, year-round water, thick brush for cover, and millions of acres of farmland offering an easy meal. What makes feral hogs different from almost any other invasive animal in North America is the math behind their reproduction. A female can conceive by the time she is 6 months old. Pregnancy lasts under 4 months, and a healthy sow can raise 2 litters in a single year, each one holding anywhere from 4 to a dozen piglets. Run that forward across 5 years, factoring in how many of those piglets survive to breed themselves, and a single pair of hogs can theoretically be the ancestor of hundreds of animals. This is not a population you manage once and move on from. Every year you do not remove enough hogs. The ones left behind do not just replace themselves. They multiply the problem you are facing next season. Jay Norman found that out in a single morning in 2004 on his corn farm in Fannin County. He had planted the same way for years, running his tractor down the rows and turning it around at the end of the field. That day, when he turned around, the ground behind him was already moving. More than 100 hogs were working their way down the freshly planted rows, digging up seed that had gone into the soil only minutes before. Not overnight. Minutes. These were not animals stumbling onto an easy meal. They had learned to recognize the sound of his planting equipment and to wait just far enough away to strike the moment he moved on. Norman tried everything he could think of: box traps, dogs to run them off, hunting the fields at night. Nothing held. Hogs he trapped were replaced within weeks. Hogs he scared off simply waited on a neighbor's land and came back once the pressure eased. Switching crops did not save him either. Feral hogs will eat roots, grubs, insects, eggs, even carrion, so almost anything planted in the ground gives them a reason to tear it up looking for something better underneath. The damage did not stay confined to farmland. Hogs began showing up on suburban lawns, in city parks, even on golf courses, where landscaping crews would arrive at dawn to find fairways and greens pockmarked with fresh craters overnight. Texas had a statewide problem now, and the tools everyone had relied on for generations were losing ground fast. A skilled hunter working a property hard might remove 20 or 30 hogs in a season. A breeding population can replace that many in a single reproductive cycle. Traditional box traps were just as limited, catching 1 or 2 animals while the rest of the sounders scattered and grew warier of every trap they had ever seen. Research eventually put a number on just how steep the climb was. To simply hold the statewide population steady, control efforts would need to remove somewhere between 66 and 70% of the hogs every single year. Actual removal rates across Texas were running closer to 29%. When the math runs that far behind, killing hogs one at a time was never going to be enough, no matter how many traps you set or how many nights you hunted. The real shift happened when Texas stopped treating feral hogs like a hunting nuisance and started treating them like what they actually were, an invasive species crisis that needed to be managed at scale. The first major change came from trap design itself. Instead of the old box traps and snares, landowners began installing large corral-style enclosures fitted with motion cameras and cellular connectivity. A farmer could now watch a sounder feed in real time from a phone anywhere with signal, wait until every last hog had walked inside, and only then trigger the gate remotely. That single change mattered enormously. A traditional trap that caught 2 hogs out of a group of 20 just taught the other 18 to avoid traps forever. A corral trap that waited for the whole group meant an entire family unit, breeding females included, could be removed in one capture, instead of educating survivors on how to avoid the next one. These systems were not cheap, often running into thousands of dollars once cellular fees and monitoring were included, but the return made sense on paper. Texas Wildlife Service estimated that every dollar spent through coordinated removal programs returned somewhere between $5 and $6 in damage prevented. Neighboring landowners started pooling money for shared camera systems, because a single trap covering one farm could end up catching hogs that had been raiding 3 or 4 properties down the fence line. Hogs do not recognize property boundaries, and once ranchers started sharing footage and movement data across those boundaries, they were effectively building an informal surveillance network for an animal that had always relied on staying one step ahead. Traps still had limits, though. They only worked if hogs cooperated, and some populations had grown too large and too wary for patient methods to keep pace. That is where aerial hunting came in. Companies began flying organized dawn missions when hogs were most active and easiest to spot against open ground. A ground crew might cover a few hundred acres in a night. A helicopter crew could sweep thousands of acres in a few hours, spotting bedding areas hidden in creek bottoms and thickets that were invisible from the ground, then feeding that intelligence back to hunters on foot. A typical outing runs anywhere from $2,000 to $8,000 depending on flight time and crew size, and landowners do not need a hunting license to use it on their own private property. Even so, aerial hunting alone has not been the silver bullet people hoped for. Data submitted by helicopter operators suggests all that flying has removed something like 2% of the statewide population. Over the years, it has been tracked. It helps locally. It was never going to solve this by itself. The most controversial tool in the arsenal is chemical bait, delivered through feeders engineered so that only feral hogs can physically open them. Heavy lids and spring-loaded doors require enough force that raccoons, deer, and birds simply cannot get inside, while a hog's strength and persistence let it through. Landowners condition the animals first, filling the feeders with plain corn and no toxicant at all, training the sounder to visit and to work the mechanism until it is second nature. Only once the hogs are fully comfortable does a toxic bait, usually a compound based on sodium nitrite or low-dose warfarin, replace the placebo. Field trials of the warfarin-based version in North Texas found it killed every tracked hog in the treatment area and turned up no confirmed deaths among non-target wildlife nearby. The approach remains under active review by federal regulators, and researchers keep testing new formulas, partly because hogs are smart enough that a predictable bait eventually gets avoided. None of these tools, on their own, change the overall trend. For years, Texas landowners fought this fight in isolation, one ranch running traps while the neighbor kept a few hogs around to hunt for sport, one county investing in removal while the county next door did nothing. Hogs simply drifted toward whichever direction had the least pressure, waited, and came back once things quieted down. The breakthrough was not a new gadget. It was the realization that the entire approach had to shift from individual defense to regional offense, with multiple properties and counties applying pressure on the same schedule at the same time. The data on coordinated efforts backs this up. A recent multi-state analysis found that in counties where hog removal was synchronized across a region, average crop insurance claims for corn damage fell from about 70 acres per policy down to just 10. That is not a marginal improvement. It is one of the largest documented swings researchers have measured in this fight, though notably it showed up mainly in corn, the crop hogs prefer most, with little measurable change in soybeans, wheat, or cotton. A smaller pilot program in Camp County told a similar story on a local scale. After landowners removed nearly 1,900 hogs through a coordinated abatement effort, Reported damage across the area dropped from about $2 million to roughly $1.2 million in a single year. Around all of this, a small industry has grown up that did not really exist a decade ago. Companies building and servicing smart traps, helicopter outfits running removal contracts, training programs for trappers, even buying stations that purchase captured hogs to help offset a landowner's costs. What used to be a strictly agricultural headache has become an economic sector of its own. Looking ahead, researchers are chasing something further upstream than removal altogether: fertility itself. A contraceptive bait already sold commercially in Texas works by disrupting reproduction rather than killing outright, and government scientists have spent years testing a longer-lasting immunocontraceptive vaccine, one that has already shown it can suppress fertility in wild boar for multiple years with no lasting harm to the animal. If a version like that ever gets approved for widespread use, the strategy could shift from constant killing toward a slower, quieter decline through fewer births. At the same time, thermal cameras and drones are giving ground teams a kind of vision they never had before, mapping bedding areas and travel corridors across thousands of acres in a single night, and telling hunters exactly where to be instead of leaving them to guess. The lesson coming out of Texas is not complicated, even if the problem itself is. There was never going to be one trap, one toxicant, or one helicopter that solved an invasion measured in millions of animals. What actually started turning the tide was connecting every available tool into a single coordinated system, so that a hog pushed out of one trap ran straight into another hunter, another camera, another closed gap in the fence line. Feral hogs did not become a crisis overnight, and they will not disappear overnight either. But for the first time in decades, parts of Texas are holding ground instead of losing it, and the fields that used to turn up destroyed every morning are finally starting to stay quiet. If you want more stories about the hidden battles playing out across America's wild places, stick around and follow along for what is coming next.